Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Shamini Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvise Sasunyvari Paschacheda Satarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. We're going to begin reading from the 10th canto, 9th chapter, text 21. We're still reading the story of Damodar. There's 5 days left in the month of Damodar. We're in Bhishma Panchaka. If you want to do some austerity, then the last 5 days beginning today, you could not eat any grains. That's one austerity. You could not eat anything cooked. That's another austerity. Could not eat. That's another austerity. So I wanted to describe something quite interesting that happened this morning. I was listening to a story in the Bhagavatam. There's a story that describes renunciation, and it describes it through the eyes of a prostitute who couldn't get business, and she was frustrated because she had her expectations that evening on making a lot of money, and she couldn't get a customer. And then she realized how much anxiety she was undergoing, and then she decided that she would renounce, and she would just give up that prostitute. She would give up her job as a prostitute in frustration. And this story is referred to in the Bhagavatam often, the frustration of Pingala, the prostitute. And it's about detachment when you can't get what you want, that you can be happy when you detach from it. And because obviously you can't control it, and if you detach, you'll be happy. Now, what's interesting about this story, which is not what I had planned to talk about, but because I had listened to this morning, and just happened to listen to a recording of this story, what's interesting naturally that comes to mind is there's a story in the Bhagavatam about a prostitute, and the prostitute is being used as an example of renunciation. And I think in our society, if we wanted to use an analogy or an allegory, we probably wouldn't use a prostitute, because prostitutes are considered either illegal in most places, not in Amsterdam, but in most places in America, illegal, or just considered a very degrading occupation, and why would you want to hear from a prostitute? Well, that's an interesting question, and perhaps you know that prostitution was part of the culture. Yesterday, I don't know if you were present for the class where Prabhupada said, in Mayapur we will have sections of the town for people who eat meat, people who drink, people who smoke. He didn't mention prostitution, but we learn from Prabhupada's purports that prostitution was part of what was considered necessary, interestingly, within Vedic culture for men who were not satisfied, so that they don't, as Prabhupada said, contaminate virgin women, or maybe in a more modern context, just contaminate women, virgin or otherwise. So it piqued my interest, and of course this is something that I've known for a long time. So it piqued my interest that how is it that in Vedic culture there were prostitutes? And even more interesting and confusing is that sometimes Prabhupada describes that these prostitutes were devotees. And it sounds like circumstantially they ended up in a situation where that was their only means of livelihood. Where our societies are different today, especially in America. No matter where you start, you can end up practically anywhere. You can borrow money, the government will give you money to get educated. Somehow you can always find a job, pay for an apartment, pay for your food. You can make it. But even today in India, often when you're born into a certain social environment, and there's no opportunity to get out of that environment, or very little opportunity, or you would need help getting out of that. So it was kind of like that ended up being their varna, so to speak. They were born in that society, and that became their occupation, even though they were devotees. And there's a story of a man who was always condemning a prostitute. And the prostitute who was always condemning herself, but the man was always thinking of the prostitute, and the prostitute was always thinking of Krishna because she felt condemned. And so Krishna said the prostitute will go back to Godhead, the man will not, because the man is always meditating on the prostitute, where the prostitute is meditating on Krishna. So it seems the position of prostitution within Vedic culture was a little different. So it's interesting because it's not regarded in the same way in our culture. But Prabhupada said it was necessary. And Prabhupada also said polygamy was legal because men, their sexual appetite is very strong. And they often will need to marry more than one woman. And of course, in our society, polygamy is illegal. And it also, you have to be wealthy enough to be able to support women. And then co-wives would have to get along. So it's complicated, but that's another issue of how it would play out today. But in Vedic society, it was legal. And Prabhupada said, many men in Vedic society did not marry. You had brahmacharis and sadhus and renunciates and sannyasis. And so the female population was greater than the male population. And so in order to facilitate the female population finding a husband, men were allowed to marry more than one woman. And also, as I said, because Prabhupada said that many men were not satisfied with one woman. And you might say, well, why should we allow them to marry more than one? They should be satisfied with one. And of course, Prabhupada said that, at least for those who are Krishna conscious. So polygamy, we're trying to reduce that attraction, not increase it. But these are interesting points because they did exist in Vedic society. And so it caused me to think about it. So I did a little investigation and I found something which was quite interesting. Maybe amazing. Well, amazing to me. Maybe not to you. I hadn't thought of it. There was a state in the United States that had legalized. Actually, there was an oversight in making a law, and in the oversight, they had legalized a certain form of prostitution. That you could have a business where prostitutes worked inside; they couldn't work on the street. And that was an oversight. And so for many, many years in this state, prostitution was legalized. It's illegal everywhere in America except Nevada, I think, and not everywhere in Nevada. So basically it's illegal, but there was an oversight in the legislation, and so there was a loophole which allowed for legalized prostitution indoors. But the interesting thing is, which corroborates what Prabhupada was saying, that during that time, I don't think it's legal now, but during that time when it was legal, the incidence of rape decreased 39%. Isn't that interesting? In other words, it verifies what Prabhupada's saying, that many men, materialistic men, have this sexual need that's very strong, and prostitutes service that need without, as Prabhupada said, polluting virgin girls, or in our social context today, polluting innocent girls. And so there you have this figure, that it actually works. So I just thought it was interesting to share that with you, how Vedic culture is. Yeah, it's so much different from our culture, but in many ways, it can be corroborated or verified even in the modern social context, and this is an example of it. And the incidence of sexually transmitted diseases also went down, because in legalized prostitution, everything is controlled. Am I advocating legalized prostitution? No. Well, I'm not advocating it one way or the other. Am I advocating devotee men go to prostitutes? No. We don't advocate that. But the thing to understand is that there might be things within a social context that are necessary for people in general, that if we, this is of course a theoretical idea, if we were asked to be in charge, we would have to deal with, and this would be one of them. So it may be wrong for Brahmins, and we are all Brahmins or Brahmins in the making, but it may be okay for society in general. And yesterday when we were talking about cows, cow kata, I believe we had mentioned that Prabhupada said, if you want to eat meat, just wait for the cow to die naturally. Don't kill it. Yeah, or you can follow certain Vedic rituals and eat another animal, a hog, or whatever, a snake, a goat, but not a cow. That's sacred. So these things are allowed, and so the Brahmins would have to consider how these things would be administered, even though the Brahmins themselves would not do such things. They recognize the different modes of people and the different nature of people, and people need to satisfy certain material propensities. Now, at the same time, what's interesting is that Prabhupada said that the goal of Varnashram is to gradually bring people to the Brahminical stage. Brahminical stage, that sounds like an interesting statement, because Brahmins are teachers and Brahmins are priests. And you think, well, but everybody's not a teacher or priest. So what does Prabhupada mean by Brahminical stage? He means the stage of Sattva-gun. Brahminical qualities like cleanliness, honesty, austerity, sense control, and so forth. That is the epitome of human life, is Brahminical life. It doesn't necessarily, according to my understanding, mean that a person who has the propensity to engage as a Kshatriya or Vaishya or so forth would be engaged as a Brahmin, but by culture, they would culture those higher qualities. So the whole ideal in Vedic culture is to bring people to that, to bring people eventually to come to Sattva-guna in their lifestyle. And so they do allow things which are tamasic, like meat eating, intoxication, prostitution, and so forth. But the idea is to regulate it and control it for two reasons. So it doesn't become a disturbance in society, and so gradually those people engaged in those activities become purified. So those are the so the seers of Vedic knowledge understand that people have different natures, and you have to engage those natures, but you have to engage those natures in a way that gradually they'll want to give them up. And so that's the idea of the Vedic process, at least in theory, that you would allow people to engage in sinful activities even, but in a regulated way, with the intention that they would gradually want to give it up. So that's why prostitution was allowed. It was, as Prabhupada said, necessary for certain men in a certain stage of consciousness and to protect innocent women. And so we see it's true because, as I said, in this state where prostitution was legalized, the incidence of rape decreased almost 50%, 39%. That's almost 50%. That's amazing. And the other 50% didn't know that prostitution was legal, right? Otherwise it would have been 100%. So that's amazing. So it also helps us, or it's interesting to look at the ideals in Vedic culture and what their purposes are, if and how we could apply them. Now, maybe you don't know, but the idea of polygamy came up during Prabhupada's time and was presented to him. And he said it was a good thing because it would allow every woman to find a husband. But it was illegal. And so because it was illegal, Prabhupada said we can't do it. And then he said, for us it's not good. So he said in general it's a good thing in society. And then he clarified that it meant really for ordinary people, materialistic people, not for us. And then, as I said, he said, because for us, we're trying to reduce and renounce. We're trying to reduce sex and renounce, be as renounced as possible, as simple as possible. So then to encourage polygamy wouldn't make sense for us because we're living a Brahminical life. One second. So I just had to say that. I thought it was so interesting. And it has nothing to do with Damodar, but it's an interesting exercise. And I don't necessarily feel that qualified. I don't know if any of us are at this point. It's an interesting exercise to ask the question, how would you deal with this issue if you and your Brahminical council were in charge of the government or the state, the city, the country, the world? How would you administer? How would you deal with this particular issue? Or how would you deal with a variety of issues if you were in charge of the government? You have prostitution, meat eating, gambling, illicit sex. You have polygamy. You have so many things. How would you deal with it within the modern context? Or maybe the question would be, how do we understand it Vedically? And then first understand it, how it applies in Vedic culture. And then the next question is, how would it apply in our culture? And similarly, we're doing that in our preaching because we are doing two things. We're explaining the philosophy, and then we're also telling people how to practically apply the philosophy. And so philosophy doesn't change, it's always true, but the context in which it's applied is always changing because society is drastically changing these days. And society is also not even considering it changing, it's just different in different countries. So America is different than Mexico, it's different than Eastern Europe, it's different than China, it's different than India. How do you apply the same philosophy and the same principles within a particular culture? And if you go to India, people, let's say, over 50 or 60 are entirely different than people between 25 and 50 or 25 and 40. The culture that the younger people grew up in was totally different. So how do you apply these things? So it's also something we have to consider when we're teaching Krishna consciousness. We have a concept, an idea. This is the truth right here. How is that applied in the Vedic culture, and how does that relate today within the lifestyle we have, or with how people think today? Because sometimes in order to explain something to people, you have to dissect it and you have to really understand it yourself. Otherwise, they won't understand it because it may be something that it is not politically correct, or it goes so much against the way people think. But if you can dissect it and explain it, it will make sense to them as something not ancient, archaic, out of date, but something that actually would solve problems in present-day society. Like, I'll give you an example. Sorry to get off track, but I think this is important. We have things that went on in Vedic culture that seem to us today very, very strange, or maybe even preposterous. Like, I think Prabhupada said that his wife was, when he was married, his wife was 8 or his wife was 11. And his daughter, I believe, was 16 and wasn't married, and his wife was ready to commit suicide if she didn't get married, or it might even have been 12. So they didn't live together at that age, but they were married at that age. And then when they hit puberty, they lived together and they lived with their parents. So that seems really strange, doesn't it? Okay, you have a daughter, and she's between 8 and 11, you get her married, and at 13 she leaves the house, and by 15, 16 she has a child. That seems strange within our culture. And okay, then so you have to dissect that. You have to explain it philosophically to someone, because someone's going to look at that and they're going to say that's weird, and that is like, what do they call that? It'd be like child slavery. within the modern context. Okay, so how do we explain that, and what does it mean? Well, the idea behind it was to avoid illicit sex. So if a girl knows at an early age, before she reaches puberty or right at that time, she knows, I have a husband and in the future I'll be married, then all the dating and all the boyfriend, girlfriend, and then the accidental illicit sex, or not accidental, but the accidental pregnancy and the abortion, or the single woman without a husband having a child, all of that is avoided. And you know all of those who are older than 11, which is all of you, you know all the psychological energy and suffering that goes into living as a teenager and going to school and all the games that are played and so forth. And when you're betrothed, you have, I have a wife. I don't have to worry about girlfriends. I'm 12 years old. It's already, when I'm 16 or 18 or 20 or whatever, 24, then we'll be married. We'll live together. So it was to avoid illicit sex. It was to avoid having abortion, the need for abortion, and it was to avoid that whole sexual energy that permeates the world today, because there's no need for it. So now you might say, but how could we do that? Or would we want to do it? And if we did decide, do we want to do it? Yeah, we just maybe want to change the age a little bit. Do we want to force our kids to marry somebody? No. But do we want to help them at a younger age? If we could, yes. How would that work in modern society? We're not actually sure, because the society is different. So in that society, women were not educated beyond I think 8 or 10 or 11. They were educated after that point to be housewives and mothers. That was their education. They didn't have careers. So it made sense. If you're being educated to be a mother and a housewife, and that's all women did, and all the women were okay with that, there weren't big protests and revolution, that was accepted, and that your dharma as a woman is to be a wife and a mother, then in that context, yeah, well, if that's the case, then when I hit puberty, I should be married because I can have children. And so they would have children very young, and they would live within an extended family, and so they would get help from the mother and the grandmother and all of that. So within that context, it worked. And you could understand it worked because that was the training of the girls from the very beginning. So I'll give you an example of how this works. Not exactly how this works, but how it could work. So I was living with some devotees for a week or two, and we were talking about divorce, and I was asking about the divorce rate in India. And at that point, it was very low. It was like almost negligent. It's changing. But this might have been 8 years ago. And I think every year in India, things become exponentially degraded. But at that point, she said the divorce rate, at least in her city, was probably 1%. Very rare. And I said, why? Your society is becoming westernized, so why the divorce rate isn't increasing? She said, because we were raised from the very beginning that you only marry once. So that was like deeply programmed. So if you only marry once, you're going to be careful about the person you choose to marry. And obviously you're going to do everything you can to make it work, or do everything you can to tolerate it and make it work, quote unquote, even when it doesn't work. So it was the way they were raised. So in traditional Vedic society, everywhere around you, every woman was married young. Every woman's occupation was mother and housewife. And so obviously it's different today, but you could understand within that context, it was natural. And so it wasn't a problem. And it solved the illicit sex problem. It solved the disturbance that a young boy and girl go through when they're growing up after puberty. And it therefore solves the abortion problem, because marriages where sex was only happening within marriage. The society, Prabhupada said something really interesting, which relates to this discussion, but it also relates to our spiritual life. Prabhupada said that when he grew up in India, culturally, it was really not allowed in a public place for a man and a woman to speak unless they were husband and wife, or brother and sister or something. But friends, like your school friends or classmates, that it didn't happen. And I have a disciple, he's maybe like 58. And so let's go back like 30 years to the 80s. So let's say the late 80s. He said in his school there was male and female, and this is university, and the impression I got was it was just one group of students who took all the same classes together. And he said in the 4 years he never spoke to a female student. It wasn't the culture. Of course, the culture is different today. But when you have that culture, it's just what you do. Whether you want to do it or not, it's just what you do. Just like we have cultural bounds. And in anything that's accepted in our culture as proper or improper, most people will do, even if they don't want to. So Prabhupada said, it wasn't that we didn't want to speak to the women. He said we did, but it wasn't accepted culturally, so we couldn't. So I think that's significant, both as a social observation and as something for ourselves spiritually. There are many things that we may want to do that are improper, and we don't do them, even though we would like to do them. And so that's what Krishna consciousness means. It means there are certain principles we follow, and whether we want to do them or not is not the issue. The issue is, should they be done? And I think a lot of times devotees, they fall into a problem where they want to do something. It's a very strong desire, but it's not proper. And it kind of becomes justified by the fact that, well, I want to do it, so I have to fulfill that need. It's not exactly like that, black and white. There may be something you want to do that's wrong, and so you don't do it, even though you want to do it. It's just wrong. So that's the example Prabhupada's giving. He said every young boy wants to talk to young girls, but in the society he grew up in, it was restricted. It was taboo. It was not allowed. The mingling of boys and girls was not allowed. So even though they wanted to do it, because it wasn't allowed, it was socially improper. They couldn't do it, and they didn't do it, and it prevented a lot of problems. In our society, things are more like, why should you restrict yourself if you feel like doing it? And the feeling becomes the truth. Well, it's because I feel like doing it, it must be good. No, not because you feel like doing it is it good. It's good because it is good, not because you feel like it. And it's not bad because you feel it's bad. It's bad because it is. There is another standard aside from our feelings. So that's an important point. So if you were explaining, for example, why girls were married young, just the principle, you'd have to understand it, and you'd have to see how it worked socially within that context. And then you could explain, well, within that context, it worked. Today, we wouldn't marry girls at that age. Society's different. Girls are going to need to work. They're not well protected and so forth. But the principle of in Vedic culture was how to control or harness the sexual tendency, because the sexual tendency is so strong, and the sexual tendency can cause problems both in men and women. We see men exploiting women and not taking responsibility. We see women being exploited by men who leave them with children or leave them pregnant. So the sexual taboos within Vedic society were meant to prevent all the problems that we see are facing modern society today, including venereal disease and abortion and divorce and single parenting and so forth, which is the problem is just increasing. And if you look back and you see the more religious a society was, generally the more these things are controlled. And if they're not controlled, it creates a huge problem. Like, for example, in Bhagavad Gita, one of Arjuna's arguments is, if we go to battle, so many men will die, and that means that their wives will no longer have husbands, and the husbands protect the wives. And so it was actually a sexual argument. Arjuna said the women will be exploited by men, because now there'll be no man to protect them. And so exploited means sexually exploited. They'll be taken advantage of. And so that tendency is there in men. Women, you may or may not know that, but the unfortunate fact is that men, there's a saying something like for women, when are women inclined to have sex? Well, they're inclined to have sex if under certain situations, and if men are treating them well, and it's romantic and so forth. And when are men ready to have sex? Anytime, 24/7. It's the way their bodies and minds are constituted, unfortunately. So Vedic society, in all its rules regarding marriage and sex, which may seem to young people today to be really strange or really restricting or archaic, it was just meant to prevent illicit sex, which then creates illegitimate children. And Arjuna said, if the women are exploited, they'll become pregnant, they'll have children out of wedlock, and the consciousness with which these children are conceived will be very low, and these children will actually be problems for society. Isn't that interesting? So then that brings up the whole other idea we have to explain to people, is that not only should children be raised in a loving family with two loving parents who will take care of them and love them, but they should be conceived with two loving parents who want to have them. And of course we know the Ayurveda teaches that the consciousness of the parents at the time of procreation is transferred into the consciousness of the child. So devotee parents at the time of conception will pray that Krishna, please send a devotee, please send a pure devotee, please send someone who can help the world. They'll pray for an elevated soul. And Arjuna's making the point, if the women aren't protected, there'll be illicit sex, and then there'll be all these children born out of wedlock, because when women aren't protected and women aren't married, that tends to happen. Women will be easily exploited by men, and men will easily exploit women. And then you'll have these children who are of a lower quality. And Arjuna is saying, and Prabhupada is explaining, that when children of that stature are born, it creates a problem in society, because they're, how do we say it? Well, just say that they're of a different quality than children born of loving parents. Even the parents are not that religious, even the parents are not conceiving them in prayer, but just the fact that children are raised in a family with two loving parents, generally those children become good law-abiding citizens, or good is relative, but they become, normal, nice people relative to what we consider nice today. But you understand what I'm saying. So then when you dissect this whole problem from all these angles, and then you go back to the idea of children becoming married young, and understanding that women were not educated on a university level, and they didn't. It was the men who earned and the woman who just took care of the home and kids. Then it starts to make a little more sense. And then you isolate the principle. Well, the main principle, whatever the social context is today, however you want to apply it today, the main principle is to create a situation in which women are protected from aggressor men. Now, another point in Vedic society is that women, it is stated in Manu Samhita, where women are not protected, everything will go bad. And where women are protected, the goddess of fortune is there. So when we say women are protected, then some women may say, well, I don't need protection, and this is, belittling or degrading me to say I need protection. But actually you do need protection from aggressive men who may make you believe that they love you or they have your interest in mind, when in fact they don't. They just want to use you for themselves, and they will leave you for another woman. And of course we see that again and again and again. And that mentality is there in many men. I would say the majority of men in Kali Yuga. It's just so amazing to have a man who can be a husband and stay with his wife and take care of her. That in Kali Yuga, that's becoming more and more rare. So when we say women are protected, we say, well, the father protects the daughter. What's he protecting her from? Ultimately, he's protecting her from men who could exploit her. And so he's going to choose the husband. He's going to tell her, stay away from men. I will choose your husband, or stay away, be suspicious of men if I don't approve, and so forth. That's how the protection goes. And so, of course, in modern society, girls don't generally want their fathers involved. They want to have romance and so forth. But we see that creates a problem, because women don't always have the discretion to understand who is the right man for them. And men, well-intentioned, have very strong sexual urges and may proposition the woman or engage in illicit sexual activity before they're married and get the woman pregnant, and may later on decide he doesn't want to marry and leaving her, because men are irresponsible. So that's one of the things that women are being protected from. Now, that's the main thing when we say women should be protected. And so that's the argument Arjuna's giving, that if we kill all the husbands, now who's going to protect the women? The women will be exploited. Now, Prabhupada said the women's liberation movement, perhaps you're familiar with it, and it was kind of a movement in which women wanted to have equal, the idea was women should have equal rights as men, and they wanted to be sexually liberated. That was part of the equal rights. And Prabhupada said it was actually a trick of the men so that they could sexually exploit women. Because if women's sexual restraints were dropped, then you didn't need a prostitute anymore. Just any woman was available. And she would be willing, in the name of women's liberation and freedom, to be like a man, which means sexually unrestricted. Which also means that any girlfriend you had was likely to have sex with another man, because they were sexually liberated. So then the women started becoming like the men. The men are pretty sexually out of control. As I said, men, when are they ready for sex? 24/7, pretty much. And women in general are not like that. And as the women became a little bit more like men and sexually liberated, then they're becoming more like men. And they're artificially agitating their sexual side. And so they become more ready for sex like men, and then everything goes to hell. One thing that I observed early on in India, when I first went there, was that every married woman wore a sari. I don't remember how the unmarried girls were dressed, but I do remember the only thing I saw with older women were saris. And I do remember in whatever little interaction I had with Indian women, just in buying a ticket or a flight attendant or something, it was always very, very reserved and very formal, and you could see that there was a lot of chastity within the Indian woman and how she dealt with men. It was just obvious to me. And of course, I was a brahmachari, and so I appreciated that. I felt being in India as a brahmachari, it was so easy because the women just had formality and respect by nature. That was their culture. And so I thought, the degradation of Indian society, how will we know when Indian society has hit a threshold of degradation? I say, we'll know it when the women give up their chastity, when they change their dress, when they become loose. He said, because the men are always willing. And what's stopping the men from engaging in illicit sex. It's the women, because the women won't do it. They can't do it. The men will always do it. It's like a young teenager. If you ask them, you don't have to ask them, are you hungry? They're always hungry. You just give them food, they'll eat it. You just don't even ask. Just go, here, I have something. Here it is, take it. And they'll just take it and they'll eat it. They're always hungry. And you feed them, an hour later, they'll eat. So men sexually are like that. They're always ready. And so what keeps society pure is that the women are chaste, that they don't allow men to exploit them, that sex is only allowed within marriage. So that's Vedic society. So I understood as this young brahmachari, when the women become unchaste in India, that will be the degradation of that whole culture. Now, it's already happened in India. If you go to India now, you drive by a university, the girls are wearing tight shirts and tight jeans, just like the girls in the West wear. And maybe in India even worse, because when you're trying to compete with the West, you kind of go overboard. You do it even more than Westerners do. And they're sitting smoking cigarettes. So, rewind 30 years ago, no way, they would be arrested. They would be beaten by their fathers to dress like that and hang out with the boys and just talk. What to speak of illicit sex, which is becoming more and more rampant in India. So then when you understand this whole context and you understand where society is going today, and just look at statistics of sexually transmitted diseases, the number of abortions, single families, and the consequences of single families on the children psychologically, then you want to start to understand, this idea of marrying the kids young, it's starting to make more sense. Of course, you can adjust it, and so you would adjust the principle, and the principle is that the parents help the child decide who they should marry. They work together to make so rather than freely mingle and decide who's the best romantic partner. They actually decide who would be the best husband and wife. In the understanding that you're going to be fathers and mothers to children, and it's so important that you're compatible and you're capable and qualified. And so, what's so interesting today, I will get to your questions. What's interesting today is that if you want to adopt a child, it's not easy. You have to show a certain level of income and other factors. Stability in I don't know all the factors, but I was told that it's not easy to adopt, and it's not cheap, and they want to make sure you're a capable parent, but anybody can get pregnant. So it's like, it's quite a paradox. But it's a nice principle. You want to get married, you want to have children. Are you qualified? Are you capable to be a husband, a wife, a mother, a father? So, in a traditional culture, any traditional culture of the world where women were protected, their protection ended up being the protection of their family. Because if they had the right husband and the right relationship, they had a husband who would stay with them and take care of them. And they then would have children who, in their old age, if the husband died or the husband left home to become a sannyasi, they would have sons. And the protection of woman is that the sons would take care of them. They wouldn't be left like now the husbands leave the wife. Okay, I'm leaving you, and you've got the kids and whatever. And they fight in court to pay as little money as possible. Right? So, yeah. So, anyway, I'll get to your questions now. I just wanted to... The original point, for those of you who came late, was I was making a point that there are certain things within Vedic culture that seem wrong or very strange or even unethical or unjust or almost like slavery, marrying a young girl at an early age. But I was saying that there are principles behind it, and we have to understand principles and then adjust to how we apply them. But we need to understand the principles, because if we don't understand the principles, then we'll think something is really strange. And I originally was describing how in a state in America where prostitution was legalized, rape decreased 39%. And so that was the purpose of having prostitution within Vedic society. It was to protect women. And so if you look at Vedic society, there's a principle, Manu Samhita, women should always be protected. They should always be protected. They should be honored. They should be respected. And so these injunctions, which might look like you're exploiting a young girl, actually were methods of protection. And in our society, in the name of freedom, young girls are being exploited. So, so let's read your comments. It's a very interesting discussion, both specifically about the topic and in generally about the principle of understanding Vedic culture and how to apply it in the proper context. Because I don't know if in our lifetime, but in somebody's lifetime, if Krishna consciousness becomes big, we're going to have large communities of thousands of people, and we're going to have to apply these things. And in Mayapur, we're going to have a community, we're going to have a city, and we're going to have to apply these things. So let's look at your questions. Comments or questions. Controversial topic. Controversy creates interest and attention and questions. But we are also dealing with such problems in ISKCON, like a marriage. For example, a man is about sex and has problems to control, and women devotees polluted by him. Maybe what I will say will sound controversial. Well, it's going to wake everybody up, so let's read it. But maybe better husband go to a prostitute than disturb wife who wants to follow strictly the rules. I'm just wondering. Well, first thing I would say is that Prabhupada, although he explained, as I was saying earlier, he explained the principle of the necessity of prostitution for such men, so they will not pollute women, other women in general. And you might think, well, are these married men or single men? It might be either one. As far as a devotee going to a prostitute, I have a story of a brahmachari who went to a prostitute, and on that night he went to a prostitute. The police decided they were going to crack down on prostitution, because prostitution is illegal, but the police would turn a blind eye to it. And they cracked down to it. And he got caught and arrested and ended up in jail. So Krishna put that devotee in his place, for sure. Prostitution is not meant for devotees. But you brought the question up. Would it be better, let's say the wife wants to follow her principles. So would it be better that he go to a prostitute? According to Prabhupada, no, because this actually was happening. At least we were told that this was brought to Prabhupada, that a man was visiting a prostitute. And Prabhupada didn't approve of it. He actually approved of the man doing it with his wife. Now, this is a story Jayapataka Maharaj told. I have no reason to consider the story is not true. And so Prabhupada had given some authorization for that why should your husband go to a prostitute? That's degrading. That seems to be the context of what Prabhupada's saying. You're married, you're trying to be Brahminical, why should your husband go to a prostitute? That is, but then as the point you make, well, the woman's a Brahmin, she's going on the altar and she doesn't want to do that. And I can't make a decision one way or the other. I can only relate that story, that it seems that Prabhupada was indicating that the man shouldn't go to a prostitute. I think the thing we have to consider in any situation, and this was I'm sure different devotees have different opinions on this, and so I would rather discuss this rather than come up with my opinion, because I don't think I think every situation is different, and we don't have so much from Prabhupada about this. But the general principle that Prabhupada followed in situations like this was, what is going to be the best for Krishna consciousness? And sometimes what ends up being the best temporarily may not be the best. Wherever it's illicit sex with one's wife, or if you feel that seeing the prostitute would be better to protect the wife and help the man overcome his sexual urge. Whatever situation would be best for Krishna consciousness in general, best for the family. You have to look at all these things. You have to consider all these things. Now, how would that affect the family if the man is going to prostitute? How would that affect the children if they find out my father's going to a prostitute? How would it affect the relationship with the wife? So, of course, the solution is the man should be controlled. That's the first solution. And in this situation, I would do everything in my power, if I were dealing with this, to help the man control himself sexually. And then he and his wife would have to discuss this situation and what would produce the most Krishna conscious solution. Now, I've discussed this with various devotees, this exact scenario that you're bringing up, and I've got opinions on both sides that he should do it with his wife, they should keep it within, and his wife should do it as a service and as a way maybe to become more connected, not just physically, but in their relationship. Others have said, no, it should not be allowed. She's Brahminical. It would be a compromise. And if he has to do it, he should keep it outside the family before it would contaminate the family. So you could see in both cases, the interest is what would be the most Krishna conscious. That's the interest, and how to go about it. And so some people think one way would work, and other people think another way would work. And some people will say, but look, she promised not to engage in illicit sex, so it's better he goes outside, and that way she can keep her vow. But some would say, but if she goes outside, then she's going to be degrading her husband if he does that, and sex with her would not be degrading. So these are difficult issues, but they are real issues, and we need, I would say the bottom line always is going to be, how am I going to get back to Godhead? What am I going to do to get back to Godhead? What am I going to do to maintain sanctity within my relationship, in my family? What is going to be the most Krishna conscious thing to do in any situation? And if I'm so fallen or so desperate that I have to compromise my principles, then although this sounds strange, is how do I compromise my principles in a way that does the least damage to my family and myself? That's the question you're dealing with. So obviously you shouldn't compromise your principles. But if you have no control of yourself, you say, well, if I don't, I'll probably end up raping a woman. Okay, if it's that bad, what to do? Now, my belief also is that men in this situation need help. And there are ways that they can get help. There are professional ways they can get help to deal with this problem. But if you're not going to deal with the problem and just say, is it the wife or prostitute? I don't think that's the complete solution. I think they really need help. Because the real solution is they need to be controlled and need help in controlling themselves. And I feel bad for women who are married to such men. It's really hard for them because in good faith they married a man who was a devotee who may turn out to not be able to control himself, and it makes it difficult for them if they want to control. So Katie says, you are right, I know one Prabhu that's been a devotee for decades wants sannyas from Gurudev but goes on dates with female devotees and flirts up and down. Yeah. So I think the thing that's important for women to understand, I mean, you probably understand this from your own experience, but as men are raised, they are raised consciously or subconsciously to be aggressive, sexually aggressive to women. That's considered to be a strength. And did you go out? Did this girl go out with you? What did you do? And, your friends are congratulating you because you got her to have sex with you. Even your father, your elder brother, your cousin, your uncle, like, yeah, good, great, you did it. So you're being encouraged to see women as objects of your sense gratification, like you're scoring points with other men, right? You are not in any way restrained, or very little restraint is there for most men growing up. Women are in advertising everywhere. Women are not dressed chastely anymore. So it's like you have this feast for your eyes growing up, and as young boys, because it's there, you'll naturally feast on it because that's your nature. Whereas in traditional culture, you didn't see that, so you couldn't feast on it. You go to a Muslim country, the women are covered. It's much easier for the men. You might say, this is bad, this is wrong, but I would say most devotees would say, well, it's nice, because then I don't have to see the women in the tight t-shirts and the tight jeans, which is almost, it's almost naked, basically. I don't know if you realize it, but you're almost naked because your clothes are so tight. It's almost the same from a male point of view. So you're giving men, not you, but women are giving men all this feast for the eyes. So these young boys grow up this way. And what happens is when they become devotees, they understand the value of celibacy, they understand the value of renunciation with their head, and they like it. It feels good, it's something they want to do. But you have to understand, and you probably have this experience yourself, that what you understand with your head, or even what you feel like you want to do, you have habits within you that may be just the opposite. So your head and your heart wants to be a sannyas, but your conditioning is attracted to women. But you know that being renounced would be better and simpler, and maybe you have bad experiences with women, or you feel that you as an individual could not be a good partner for women, or even if you were with a woman, you wouldn't think about taking care of her, you would be thinking more about having sex. So the idea of taking sannyas, it sounds good, because then I don't have to deal with all that. But that's not actually why you become a sannyas, because not just because you don't want to deal with women, it's because you're detached from it enough. You don't need it. But so sometimes men are caught in the middle, where the idea of renunciation is very attractive, and they'd really like to do it, but the attraction for a woman is very strong, and the men themselves are confused, not consciously confused, subconsciously confused. They don't realize how not ready they are for sannyas. Many of them, not saying all the sannyasis, but many are not ready, but they have the desire, or some have taken it, and they find out later they were not ready for it. They didn't realize that, because they thought their head and their heart liked it, and they didn't realize that just because you like something doesn't mean you're ready for it, right? It's like you might see somebody jump off a cliff in the ocean, 300 feet down, but you might do that and have a heart attack. So just because you go, oh, that looks really cool, I'd like to do that, doesn't mean physically or mentally you're ready to do it. And so I think that you could probably relate to this in your own life, that this is true for all of us. There may be things that we want to do as devotees. We're really attracted. I'd really like to live this lifestyle or be this kind of devotee. But when you try to do it, you see you've got this other conditioned side that you have to deal with. So there are, I would say, amongst my godbrothers, there are many of them who got married realizing it's something they need, not actually, how do we say this? It's not actually that they wanted to get married. They just realized it was something that they needed to do that would be good for their spiritual life, that if they didn't marry, they would have a problem. But in their head or their heart, there was renunciation. They valued renunciation, and in their head and their heart, they would say, if I were more renounced, I wouldn't get married. I wouldn't need it. I don't really want to do it. But because I'm not that evolved yet, I need to do it. And now I know that might sound strange to a woman, and think, well, I wouldn't want to marry a guy who doesn't want to get married, who only marries because he needs to. Not necessarily does he make a bad husband, But I would say there are quite a few men who lived as brahmacharis, who were very good devotees, who are very renounced, who enjoy that renounced life, who married, who are happily married, who love their wives and love their children, who married because they knew it was the best thing, not because in their mind and heart they thought it was the best thing. They thought renunciation was the best thing. I mean, our Shastra says renunciation is the best thing, so why wouldn't they think that way? So, you're dealing with this situation that you have two things going on, and sometimes, and ladies, you probably understand, but I'll just emphasize that, men being raised in this culture are impregnated deeply with these sexual samskars. The male body, as we said, it's physically, always ready for sex in an instant. And you're saying, are devotees like that? No, don't worry, devotees are not like that. But are they entirely free from that? Most are not yet entirely free from that. Most men are not. But because they're good devotees, they control it. And as they progress and advance and get a taste in Krishna consciousness, they lose interest in that. And so they come to a point, those married men who needed to be married, come to a point where they actually don't need it anymore, but they're responsible, so they take care of their wives and they take care of their children, even though they're kind of detached from it now. But it was the marriage that detached them. They couldn't, now they're ready for sannyas, but they weren't ready at the age of 35. Very few men are ready at that early age. So I would say women, you should be a little compassionate upon men, or maybe compassion is not the right word, but understanding of what a man goes through in trying to be celibate and dealing with women because of his conditioning, especially younger devotee men. It's not easy. Older devotee men, good devotees, yes, you do become purified, you do become detached. You just become detached when you're older. The older you are, the more ridiculous it is, because you're in older. Older means renounced. Your kids are grown up. You've got grandkids. Yeah, it's over, and the body makes it over. Just look at how you look, and physically you don't have the energy. So it's nature's arrangement. It's Krishna's arrangement. But still, the latent tendencies are there because they're so deeply programmed. So it may be more mental than physical. But that's just how men grow up. And we need to help our men. We need to help our women as well. And the women are probably saying, yeah, but I grew up the same way. Because the men are like that, it affected the women. I don't doubt it. I can't speak from a woman's perspective because I don't have a woman's body. So generally, on these issues, I don't try to represent them. You can represent yourself. You can make comments. My comments may not be accurate, but I obviously know that our society is sex crazed. So obviously, it affects girls by the way they dress and how self-conscious they are about their weight and their looks and their sexual appeal. Because the men demand that now, because we're in a sex-crazed society. So certainly it's affecting the women. So let's go to more controversial topics. Keep you all awake and inspired. We have to have a good name for this class. If we get the right name, then we'll get 1 million hits, right? Did I skip anyone? Sometimes I skip. Okay, so we go to Laura. Laura says, we live in Kali Yuga and we can't expect to be able to live in Sat Yuga lifestyle. I can do my best according to the time, place, and circumstance. If I will wait to have a partner like Krishna or part like Krishna or Arjuna, then I will stay forever alone. I choose the best from the worst. You tell your husband, you're the best I could get. And I'm carving a devotee out of the person I have. Guess what? It works. Yes. I think everything in Kali Yuga is like that. I have to somehow make it work with, okay, these are the materials you have, so build it with these materials. So yeah, that's nice. And I think, redefining what it means to be a good husband or a good wife, I think that's a problem also, because if you marry a man and say, well, he seemed to be a good devotee, and so you expect A, B, and C, or she seemed to be a good devotee, then you may be let down. I was having a conversation with my wife yesterday. It was so interesting. And I think this is such a valuable thing for all of you who are going to get married, who are married. When my wife and I first met, it's because we were working on a preaching project. There was a large group. There was a group of brahmacharis, and then at a certain point, we invited some women, because so many women were also interested in Krishna consciousness and coming to our programs, and we needed women, and she was in the area, so she came. And so I got to know her that way through preaching. And we had moved to Dallas, and later on she had moved, and so she had joined our preaching party. And so we met as preachers, and after we married, one of the things we did was we opened a center in Austin, Texas, near the university. And so we worked, as a team, as a preaching team. So we were very involved in preaching. And then later on, we lived in Vrindavan, and we were both teaching in the VIHE. And so, our whole beginning was as preachers together from the very beginning when we met, into developing this preaching program, and then evolving into teachers at the VIHE. And then I forget what happened. Yeah, and then we had a child. So up to the point we had a child, and then we had a child. She had to stop to take care of the child, and so she wasn't involved so much in preaching. A little bit, and then from that time, she hasn't been that involved in preaching. A little bit. She made a movie. She took that out. She would occasionally help me. We would do workshops together, not that often, but sometimes. And so we were talking about it actually last night. And I said, when our daughter's older, you'll be free to get back into preaching like when you were younger. And there's so much opportunity now in the world, and opportunity to travel with me and so on. And she said something. She said, all I want to do is take care of cows. That's what I want to do. I said, really? She said, yeah. I said, I'm just like into cows. I said, why? And she said, well, on Gopastami, I fed the cows, and I just got inspired. I just want to do cows. And I said, really? She said, yeah, I want to do cows. And she said, by doing cows, the desire to preach may come again. It may awaken, but I've lost it. So I was thinking, and it relates to what you're saying. You're carving him, and you'll get the best you can get from the materials you have. And I was thinking how interesting it is that when you marry, you may be of the same mind. And then I would have never thought in a million years. My wife was raised in New York City, total city girl at that point in her life. We go to New York. Years ago, we go to New York, and then we go to the temple and leave the temple like 10:30, 11 at night, and take the subway, and with all these like people around I think are going to shoot me or strangle me. And she's like fearless, like she knows the city. She's a city girl, New York girl. Doesn't bother her at all. And now, we've lived out in Alachua, it's in the country, and we lived in Mayapur, and she's like, I just want to take care of cows, which I would never have dreamed of that. And so I was thinking, after she said that, I was thinking, one of the reasons I think we were attracted to one another is because we both loved to share Krishna consciousness, and we were doing it together, and we were a team. And we had this preaching center, and it was wonderful, and people were coming, and it wasn't like they liked me and didn't like her, or liked her, didn't like me. It was like, it was both of us. We weren't separate. It was just, we were one. You like us. You don't like us individually. You like us. And now I mean, I like cows and everything, and I think that'd be great, but I wouldn't in my wildest imagination dream that she'd become a cowherd girl. So even that devotee you carve, we've been married 25 years. 25 years from now, that carving may morph into something you didn't carve, which may be something better or something different, not necessarily worse. But it's just a lesson in that when you marry, what you marry and what that person becomes later may be two different things. And you have to support and love that person for whatever it is they're becoming. Of course, obviously, as long as it's beneficial, sattvic, Krishna conscious. But I thought that was so interesting. So you might think, I want the ideal Krishna or Arjuna, and I'm going to wait for that husband. And then, 20 years later, he decides, I just want to build mud huts. That's what I want to do. And that's his whole, and you're like doing something totally different, living in a city, pursuing an occupation, and it's growing and you're meeting people. And I just want to move out and, to Thailand and live in a hut. It's like, oh my God. And so you don't even know what you carve if it's going to stay carved. So I think that's an important point. Krishna Consciousness is saying, unfortunately, we are struggling with women protection in ISKCON. I am lucky to have a good devotee husband, but many girl devotees are struggling to find a good husband. My opinion, it's one of the excuse me. My opinion, it's one of the main problems ISKCON is struggling right now. In Poland, we have many wonderful girls ready to get married, but we have no potential good husband devotees for them. Out of desperation, the girls are finding non-devotee boyfriends, which is detrimental for their Krishna consciousness. Sorry for complaining, but I believe the healthy family should be the base of our movement. Well, Krishna Consciousness, you will be happy to know that my godbrother came yesterday and we were speaking, and I said the same thing. I said to him something similar. I said, if I see a devotee that has a good relationship, or if I have disciples and I see that they have a good marriage, then I feel like, well, now that they have a good marriage, it's a Krishna conscious. By good marriage, I mean they get along and it's Krishna conscious. I don't really worry about their spiritual life because I know over the course of their life, if the marriage stays stable, they'll both become Krishna conscious. And it's interesting because, there is concern about detachment, there's a concern about renunciation, there's a concern about so many things which are advantageous to Krishna consciousness, your sadhana, your japa, and so forth. But like you're saying, it's so interesting that in many, many cases, without having a stable and good marriage, eventually your sadhana suffers, your sense control suffers, so many things suffer. So it's such an important thing, like you say. And I totally agree with you. I think it's one of the most important things because, most people have that need for relationship and so forth. Not everyone has like nun or monk Shakti. Some devotees do. Some devotees don't need it. And some devotees, it's detrimental. Family life would be detrimental. They don't like it, they don't need it, and we would not recommend it for them. But most do need it. And when they don't get it, they can become unstable in their sadhana. And as interesting or funny or strange as it sounds, sometimes that one act of just being married is all that was required for that person to be sense-controlled, stable, and so forth. Now, some people say, that one of the problems in marriage is that young couples, they're not able to follow the no illicit sex principle consistently or that well when they get married. And of course, the question would be, well, if they can't follow it in marriage, if they struggle to remain single, would they even be able to follow it there? And it's true that many don't follow it, and we encourage everyone to follow it. But even if they don't follow it well, it's just an interest. It's like something they have to go through. It's something they have to deal with, whether they're single or not. They have to deal with that, and they have to overcome it somehow or other. But the stability, the point is the stability that the marriage provides for being a foundation for your sadhana and other things is very important in helping you overcome that. So you could say the very thing that causes it is the very thing that will help you overcome it. It's an interesting way of looking at it, isn't it? So it's not that I'm saying it's okay, but I'm saying because it does happen, but you're in the ashram at the same time where you're rightly situated to overcome it. So, and if you're a brahmachari and you're not capable of remaining a brahmachari, then that's not the ashram in which you're going to overcome it. So it's an interesting topic to discuss. It's not black and white. And I know some devotees may want to make it black and white, but I think it's too nuanced. And we see that most grihastas who are good devotees, even though some of them had difficulty following the no illicit sex principle consistently within marriage, when they became older, they had no problem following it. It just, the stability of their marriage and the growing in years and their own maturity and their own dissatisfaction with not being able to perfectly follow, all these things enable them to be able to follow it. So it's an interesting discussion. Now, we know when we make a vow at the time of initiation, we're vowing to refrain from sex and only have sex for procreation. That's the vow. And we know that even good-intentioned devotees sometimes in a weak moment may slip and fall unintentionally. And that happens. But to be within the stability of a Grihastha ashram, if that's what someone needs, it provides it just provides the stability from which to work on that problem, to be able to overcome it in a healthy and in a let's say a bona fide way, in a way that most people will need to overcome it. So when someone was sexually disturbed, Prabhupada would say, get married. And for a lot of brahmacharis, they were thinking, if I'm sexually disturbed, it seems like getting married would make it worse, because now I'm with a woman. At least now I'm sexually disturbed, but I can't do anything about it because there's no woman. But how would getting married help? But it does help, because when you get married, it then engages you in so many other actions. So it's not just sex, it's taking care of a woman, it's working, it's taking care of a house, it's raising kids. And these are all the things that go along with sex. So then sex, it comes into a new environment, and it's not just going out with a girlfriend and having sex and then leaving and not being responsible. So that whole environment purifies you, because you realize how what's involved in having sex. There's so many responsibilities that go with it, and it's not just like having a date with a girl and satisfying that desire. And even if you accidentally fall down or even consciously decide to have sex, still you have your Krishna consciousness, you have the four regular principles, you know what they are, you have your 16 rounds, you have your deities. And that doesn't always fit well within that consciousness, and most of the relationship you have with your wife and husband is not sexual, it's practical, it's dealing with the real world. So all these things end up purifying you. So even if sometimes a grihastha slips, but they slip within the context of the Grihastha ashram, the ashram itself is purifying. And so that's why Prabhupada said, get yourself married if you have sex desire. And that's why the men couldn't understand it, because they say, but I'll probably fall down. Yeah, you might, but even that will purify you, because you're within an atmosphere that will purify you. If your marriage is going to work, you're going to have to become purified of that desire eventually. If you're going to be a serious devotee, engage in deity worship and so forth, you're going to have to purify that desire. It won't find a central place in the relationship, eventually you will grow out of it. And as you relish Krishna consciousness more and more, that will become what gives you pleasure. So that's my understanding. I hope I don't get fired as a guru for saying these things. But I think I'm just describing, I don't think it's my opinion, but I was trying to describe just how it works. I'm not advocating illicit sex. I always clearly explain to devotees that illicit sex means no sex except after chanting 50 rounds and having children. That's what Prabhupada said. But I do say that I understand that sometimes devotees cannot perfectly maintain that. Even though I encourage it, I do everything I can to help them understand why they should and how they should. I do accept the reality that not everyone always can do that, and therefore we have to deal with that reality and help devotees in that situation. And it doesn't mean I'm condoning it, as some people have accused me of condoning it. I was just acknowledging it. And if a devotee is in that situation, I always encourage them to overcome it. But if I see that that encouragement is counterproductive and they're not able, then we have to take a different strategy. And it doesn't mean that we're condoning it by taking a different strategy. It means that we're recognizing that they cannot perfectly follow yet, so we have to take another strategy. And I've discussed this with many of my godbrothers, and many of my godbrothers accept this. And I don't think you cannot accept it. It's just a reality. It's happening. It's not like we want it to happen, but it happens. So we have to deal with it honestly. So please don't take this as I'm saying illicit sex is fine. Mahaprabhu said it's okay. Because I've been accused of saying this, and it didn't really mean that. I just meant that if it does exist and people cannot yet transcend it, we don't want to discourage and demonize them, but we want to help them to deal with it. And sometimes in helping them deal with it, we have to acknowledge it. It's a reality for them, and help them work their way out without demonizing them or shaming them or making them feel guilty, because if we shame them and make them feel guilty, it's not a productive way to purify them. So those things I've said before were misunderstood, and I hope by saying this, that's clear. I am, you can say in a sense, I fanatically believe in improving oneself. And I fanatically believe that all of us can be better than we are. I'm 108% convinced of that. And at the same time, I try to help people go beyond their own personal limitations. That's what I do. I've always done that. And I believe in that because I believe we can all be better. But at the same time, I'm realistic. And when I see, and I'm pushing people, you can be better and better, but I see where they're at. I deal with them where they're at. Okay, I understand where you're at. I would like you to be above where you're at, but I see that you're not ready for that. So then I deal with it realistically. And sometimes in my realistic dealing, some people misunderstand me. They think I'm minimizing or I'm allowing people to be fallen or even encouraging them or validating it. I'm not. I'm just dealing with the reality that this is where the person is at, and we have to deal with them from that position and help them from that position. Although we try to help them come above that position, they're not ready yet. So I have to make that clear because it's been misunderstood and I've been criticized for it. And this is how Prabhupada dealt with situations. He always pushed us to the ideal, and then he dealt with the reality. A sannyasi fell down. Okay, that's a reality. So what did Prabhupada say? Get your robes back on, get your danda, go to Vrindavan, do penance for 2 months. He'd say, well, if you want to get married, get married. That's the reality. And you could say, Prabhupada's telling sannyasis to get married. That's wrong. No, it was just, that's what they needed to do. So that's what he did. So I just want you to understand that. We as preachers and as individuals, we want to strive for following perfectly what Prabhupada gave us. But if we realize, at some point, we'll realize that, okay, despite my best efforts, I'm falling short in this way or that way, then let me deal with where I'm at now rather than shoot for 10. I realize I'm out of 5, so I just need to shoot for 6 now. And by shooting for 10, I was just getting discouraged because I was never getting beyond 5 anyway, or 5.5. So even if I got to 6, I would be depressed because I was shooting for 10. Whereas if I say, okay, I can see in this situation that 6 is what's realistic. So shoot for 6. And then when you hit 6, you're inspired. Well, I hit 6. Well, let's go for 7. Then we can go for 8 once we get to 7. So that's a different strategy. So it's not that I'm not encouraging people to go to 10. I am. But sometimes I can only get you to 6 because that's going to be the best thing for you. Why am I talking about this? You must think, what's going on? Why is he making this point over and over again? Because I've been misunderstood. I've been questioned on this, and people have thought that I'm saying something that Prabhupada didn't say. So I just wanted to be clear that I'm always representing Prabhupada, but at a time when a person has tried to follow, and I've done my best to help them follow, and they just can't, we have to say, okay, you're here. Let's accept that without guilt and shame. But you know the goal is here. So now let's see, can we bring it up to a 5.2 even, if that's all you can do. And then from 5.2, can we get to 5.5 and like that? Okay. Let's do something about the tilak, the sun tilak. Or maybe you like the sun tilak. Okay. Do you have any advice for women devotees who want to get married with a good devotee husband but having a problem with it? It seems that praying to Krishna is the only solution. There's a lack of good. I actually do have a solution. There's lack of good men. Now this sounds like maybe a strange solution, but I have a sense that someday in ISKCON this solution will be adopted because it makes so much sense, and it's already being adopted in Mayapur. My solution is that brahmacharis should be trained to be husbands, to be good husbands. That should be a fundamental part of brahmachari training. Why? Because most men, I don't have statistics, but by observation, I would say many men, or perhaps all men would admit, to one degree or another, we were not prepared to be married. We didn't know what it meant to be a good husband, a good father. And we had to learn by doing it, and therefore making mistakes and causing distress to our wives. Or vice versa, the wives didn't know how to be good wives and cause distress to their husband or cause distress to their children. You know, women, if you were in anxiety, if you were stressed out, if you are yelling and screaming and so on, and you feel like a failure and you want your kids to succeed because you failed, you're going to drive your kids crazy. So, as men need help, women need help. So, I think one of the, there's two solutions. Make more devotees and train those men to be good husbands. So now in the West, in America, we're not making so many devotees, or in places where we're not making so many devotees and there are more female devotees, it's a problem. I'm going to countries now where it's majority are women. So like, how are the women going to get married if most of the people joining are women? So we need to be making more men devotees, and we need to be training them. The other thing, which Laura said, is we're going to have to carve men who are not really devotees, but who are pious, religious, favorable to Krishna consciousness, good guys who will provide well, protect the women, who the women get along with. Women are going to have to learn how to find those men and how to carve those men. And in some cases, you say over a long period of time, those men may be better. Not because they're better devotees, but just because they're better men. They'll still be around 30 years from now. They'll still be taking care of you. They're reasonable, they're balanced. You need their help, they'll give it. They won't fight and say, no, women should be submissive. You have to do whatever I say. You won't get in those kind of dysfunctional relationships that sometimes can happen with men who are a little more narrow-minded. And as we're saying, even those good devotee men, 30 years, you don't know where they'll be. So that is one reason that women may want to consider, that man that's coming to the program for the last 10 years that still is not chanting one round, but he likes Krishna. Or that vegetarian who's, been doing yoga for 10 years, who goes to kirtans but hasn't really associated with ISKCON. But he's a really nice guy and you get along really well. You may want to consider that in the long run, after 20, 30 years, maybe that guy will be a better devotee than the good brahmachari who was not really equipped. So I think it's important to look at things that way. And then it's also important for women to look at, well, what are your options? You might say, well, if I can't marry a good devotee husband, I'd rather remain single. If that's okay with you, then sure. But if marriage is important to you, and there are not that many male devotees, and among the male devotees, maybe not that many who you would think would make a good husband for you, then you have to consider other options. And also you have to understand women that the way many men were trained as brahmacharis, in a sense, some men, at least I was trained this way in my generation, and I think in many places it's still true to one degree or another. They're trained in a way where not only are they not trained to be good husbands, they're actually trained inadvertently trained to be bad husbands. So they have conceptions of marriage that are very, very Vedic, or maybe Vedic, maybe Vedic's not the word, but misunderstood. The Vedic conceptions, which are misunderstood, misapplied, and also not mature themselves in terms of their own sensual control. And so they don't actually make good husbands, even though they're good, like they have good sadhana, but they're bad husbands. They have strange conceptions of marriage, strange conceptions of duties of wives, qualifications of men. So that's why I say men need to be trained. And in lieu of good men, you're going to have to consider that a man who is compatible with you, who is favorable to Krishna, who would support you in what you're doing, who would not demand things of you that would break your principles, could be an option, and maybe could even be a better option. And Prabhupada had allowed girls to marry life members, Indian men. So that's also another consideration. Indian men, they have the culture. As long as those Indian men have the culture and are not just marrying a Western woman for sex, because that happens also. So, Katie says, the problem with men is not the way the women dresses, it's the way the culture and society raise them with disrespect towards women. When I was Muslim, I was wearing jihab. Jibab. Was it jihab? No. I can't read it. How come I can't remember? The burqa, right? Wearing the cloak, the garment that falls over the body and covers the shape of the body, and I can't pronounce it. Niqab, the garment that covers the whole face and leaves tight gap in the eyes. And yet I get harassed by so many times by Muslim men more than non-Muslim. Oh my God, that is so unfortunate. Well, I can't argue with that, but I would say, in answer to that, say, at least you were dressed properly, so it's their fault, right? Totally their fault, and you were dressed properly. So you didn't do anything to agitate them. But if you wear tight pants and jeans, sometimes it's not their fault, and they get agitated. And I'll explain what I mean, because I'm explaining this from a man's point of view. About 20 years ago, during Christmas, I had a cart in a mall. It's a cart that moves, and they bring the carts out for Christmas, and you put your products on the cart. And it's about 6 feet long, and about 8 feet high, and about 4 feet wide. or maybe 7 feet long. And what they have is, they have a tarp that goes around it, and at night you put the tarp around it, and then you put a little lock on the tarp. And if anybody, wanted to steal it, they could. And so we used to say, the only reason we're locking it is to keep the honest people away. In other words, if you're an honest person and you see this cart and it's like you could just open it and take something, you might be tempted just because you can, even though you didn't go to the mall thinking, I want to steal something, and you never steal something. But it's like we could do a social experiment where you just close the cart and you leave it kind of slightly open and it's not locked, and you can see the products and think, would anybody steal something? And probably eventually some non-thief would steal something just because you could steal it. It was a temptation. Where if it's locked, he's not gonna try to break the lock. So the way women dress is something like that. It's just to keep the innocent, nice boys from getting agitated. The not nice boys, like you say, they'll be agitated no matter what, but that's just how they think. Thieves are thieves. They'll steal. If it's locked, they'll steal it. So your cloaked is like the lock. But at least it keeps the innocent boys away. They're not going to... But when you're dressed half naked, then even the innocent boys think about stealing. So, Katie, let me think. Tell me if that makes sense to you. Radhika says, isn't it that earlier people didn't really have less sexual energy? It's just the question of how to use it. We are raised to meditate upon opposite sex, and it's truly for both sides, not only boys. I agree, totally. It's the point. The point is, the sexual energy is there in every conditioned soul. Otherwise, you wouldn't take on material body. You would go back to Krishna, or you'd go to Brahman. You'd go somewhere other than the material world. So because we have a material body, that's part of the reason there's this energy to exploit the opposite sex. So yes, when we take on material body, and as soon as we hit puberty, it's like, wow, the opposite sex all of a sudden becomes beautiful. Those same boys that I hated, that I thought were yucky and dirty and smelly and idiots, all of a sudden they're beautiful and I want to hang out with them. The same thing with the girls. Of those girls who, play with dolls and stupid stuff, and, they can't, wrestle and climb up mountains. All of a sudden you want to hang out with them and have real dolls and make real babies with them, So it changes, yes. So the idea of Veda culture is that energy is there, so we have to subdue it. And so the culture has to support that subjugation of that desire, whereas you're saying our culture is just the opposite. It's magnifying that desire. It's being exploited for economics, which is sick. It's like our lives are being endangered so people can make money off us. So they design clothes. Those clothes, girls, those clothes agitate boys. Believe me, they do. They do. If you wear loose-fitting clothes, if the boys are agitated, they'll just look at your face and be agitated. But if they're not, the clothes will unnecessarily agitate them. Don't give them anything to look at. That's the idea. And so it shouldn't be in advertising. It shouldn't, lingerie ads should be illegal. It shouldn't be in public. Pornography should be illegal. The way women dress should be illegal in some cases. Of course, it's a democratic society, so you can't control those things. And if I were running for political office and I mentioned these things, I'd probably be shot after my first talk. So we understand that, but it's a reality. So in Krishna consciousness, we're trying to create cultures which are free from this sexual energy. So we want to associate male and female in a way that doesn't excite sexual energy. And so we have certain restrictions. It's not that men can't talk to women and women can't talk to men. It's not that we can't serve together, can't go on Harinam together, go to class together, take prasadam together and all these things. But there's some etiquette in how we deal with one another so it reduces the sexual energy. So part of that reduction is respect. I respect you as sister or mother. You respect me as brother or father or son, or I respect you as daughter. So that respect is there in the dealing. So when we're interacting, there's this great degree of respect and honor for one another. And the respect is the opposite of sexual energy. So the whole Vedic culture is respect women. And so what do they mean by respecting women? They're saying, when you disrespect women, you see them as objects of sense gratification. When you respect them, you see them like mother. How can I serve you? How can I protect you? That's the duty of men. It's like Bhaktivedanta Purnaswami was saying, sometimes you might go on a program, and let's say it's like a mile away from the temple, and the temple only has one vehicle. And so some of the devotees are going to have to walk home. So in like traditional ISKCON, it's like the women would walk home and the brahmacharis would get in the van, because of course they're in control. And he said, but the proper thing is all the women in the van and the men walk home. So that's respect for women. That's culture. And not all of the men have learned to respect women in that way. So that's the idea of culture. Create a culture in which women are respected. It dissolves the sexual energy. If women are allowed to dress like prostitutes, it disregards the motherly nature of women. And so it causes men to disrespect them, because the women, it's like one man said, it was actually a book on celibacy. And he said one woman was dressed very scantily, and you could see her breast, or a lot of her breast. And then she bent over in front of him. And he was thinking, well, if she's dressed this way, it means she wants to show it off. And so she's showing it off, so I'm going to look at it. It's kind of like, you want me to look at it. You're showing it off. You're saying, it's okay, here, look at it. I'm showing it to you. So we don't want to do that. We want to create, then the men disrespect you, because they think, well, if you're showing it off, you're saying, actually, I just want to have sex. That's what it's all about. Otherwise, why would I dress this way? Now, I know women aren't always consciously thinking that way, but women, you should know that men, that's how they think when you dress that way. It's not an excuse for a man. Men should still be sexually pure, but don't make it difficult for them. And so the important point is, in a proper society, women are respected. They're not seen as sex objects, and women are respectable. So because men respect them, they're respectable. They reciprocate. They dress in respectable ways, and that's how traditionally society has been for centuries and millennia. But it's not that way anymore. So, and because this is the way society is, abortion increases, unwanted children increases, and it just there's this snowball effect of so many problems. So Laura says, very true. I guess she's talking about how men will even lust after you if you're dressed well. Yeah, okay. So just lock the tent, and if the thieves come, what can you do? But at least it'll protect you from the innocent people. It's a dilemma. Yes, the heart and the head wanting one thing and you're conditioning another. So this, oh my God, this class is going long. Okay, this is such an important topic. I was actually at one point thinking of giving a class just on this, because every devotee has to realize that just because your head and heart want something, you can't think you're qualified for it, because you have to actually look at where you're at. And then you have to balance them. Yes, I like a renounced life. Yes, it makes sense to me. But yes, I have this need for female association. And sometimes I have this need, and it's like I don't even want it. It would be better if I didn't have it, which complicates it even more. Like I see, you ever been hungry and it's like 10 o'clock at night and you're thinking, it's really bad to eat now because I'm going to get up late. And so the head's saying, don't eat. The heart is saying, bad time to eat. It's just really good to go to bed on an empty stomach. And the stomach is saying, if you don't feed me, I'm going to beat you up and kill you. And you're going to try to go to sleep, and you're going to be dreaming about pakoras. So just eat something. So, and what do? You go eat it, because if you don't eat it, you're not going to be able to go to sleep, even though your head and heart doesn't want to eat. So we have to acknowledge that reality, that our head and our heart may be so involved in a certain level of Krishna consciousness. Yes, I want to be on this level, but I'm not. And I realize I have to eat. And so now the problem becomes, how do you balance both? Because, okay, I have this great desire for advancement and renunciation and simplicity and the life of a Brahmin. And I think brahmachari life is wonderful. But I have this desire for female association, and I know it's not even I want it, it just exists. If it didn't exist, I would be happy. I have to deal with it. So now I'm dealing with it because I know I need it and I want it, but at the same time, I don't really want it. And so I have to create this balance. How do I balance the two and live peacefully as a Grihastha when I feel like there's so much of a part of me that doesn't want or need it, but there's this other part that does. And sometimes you can oscillate. Madly in love with my wife. Now I hate Grihastha life. I would just love to leave it. And then the next moment, oh, I need it so much. I'm so fallen, you know? And so you just got to balance them both and say, okay, I need Grihastha life. Let's make it work. Let's have an affectionate relationship, but let's make it simple and more renounced. Let's merge the two in something and create a new entity. Does that make sense? But that's the only way you can deal with it. You've got to merge the two and just realize, here's where I'm at, here's where I want to be at. What's like the compromise? What's the solution? What's the synergy of those two, right? Or like some men, they need to marry a beautiful woman. If she's not beautiful enough, they'll say, I know she's a nice devotee and I know we would have a good relationship, but I'm not attracted. And the woman might think, or you women might think, what a jerk, what an idiot. But actually what he's saying is not maybe what you're thinking. He's saying, I know it's stupid with my head, and I know it would be better if I married this woman, but I know my nature, and if I marry her, I know I'm going to be attracted to other women who are beautiful, because I'm attracted to beautiful women. I don't want to be, I just am. And I know if my wife is beautiful, then I won't be attracted. I'll be satisfied. So it's just a reality he has to accept. Is that this is where I'm at, unfortunately. I have to deal with it. So you have to figure out, okay, how do I deal with it in a Krishna conscious way? So I'll find a woman who's beautiful and who's a good devotee. That's what I need. And I've talked to men, this is it may be surprising to you women, I've talked to men who are very, very, very good devotees. And I was trying to help them find wives. And I said, I have a woman for you. And I think will make an amazing wife. And I'll show him the picture. And he goes, I can't marry her. I don't see her as beautiful. It's not going to work. And I go, but she'll be this amazing wife. Yeah, I know. But so we're caught in that. It's a reality. We have to deal with it. Now you might say he should transcend that. Okay, that's true. He should. But what if he can't? Then what does he do? He can't deny it. He has to deal with it. I shouldn't eat that pakora. It's 10 o'clock at night. I need to go to sleep. But I have to eat it. I'm not going to be able to go to sleep if I don't. I'm going to sit there and think about pakoras till midnight. So better I just eat the pakora and then just go to sleep. Okay, so maybe I'll sleep a half hour more. Maybe I won't have good rest. It's not the end of the world. I'll recuperate. So that's the idea. So this is something that all of us need to deal with. And we need to be, in other words, this is what I want to say, which is super important. So if you're not paying attention, pay attention now. Don't think because your head and your heart is attracted to something, you're on that level. Don't assume that. Be aware of your other side and acknowledge that other side. And realize the level you're on is a combination of both of those. It's an equation. You have this very good side. You really like to preach. You really like Sankirtan. You like a simple life. But you like also nice things, your own place, a beautiful wife, a beautiful husband, children. You like nice clothes. You like nice cars. And you have this incredible desire to give people Krishna consciousness. You love the philosophy. You read Prabhupada's books every day. Okay, so how do you synergize those? rather than denying this side, which sometimes we do. We deny this side and we think we're on this level, or we give in to this side and we deny this level. So both are wrong. You want to merge them. That's the point of this. And so you have to be willing to acknowledge that weak side. Just admit it, acknowledge it. I'm attracted to this, I'm attracted to that. Just accept it. And acknowledge the other side, and then create, so to speak, a compromise between the two that makes it real for you. And then it's real. And then if it's real, it works. And if it's not real, it doesn't work. Because if it's not real, you'll oscillate back and forth. And you'll be unstable. Does that make sense? Radhika says, I'm sorry, I know nothing about Muslim culture, but hijab sounds like a good excuse for the man to not work on self-control. It just helps them. Not saying miniskirts are great, but hiding women under blankets just because, yeah, well, just hide under a sari. Just because otherwise they might get assaulted. Talk about disrespect. Westerners are more respectful regarding that. Yeah. Well, this brings up, Radhika, this brings up a whole other discussion, and this is like turning into a seminar. The other discussion is that there is a psychology, if you hide it, it becomes more attractive. So, what's there that I can't see? And then you imagine what you can't see. So, men are, they're in a difficult situation. You uncover and it agitates them, and then you cover and then they imagine what they can't see. But I would say that's not always the case for most men. For the honest men, if they can't see it, they can't see it and they don't think about it. But it is true that for some, not seeing it becomes, it's like, what's the situation? Like in some situations where you restrict something, the problem will be greater. Whereas if you regulate it, it won't be so bad. Yeah. So you see, like in Western, like I was just in a temple, and in this temple, if you go in this temple, you'll see it's very warm family atmosphere, and part of that warm family atmosphere is there's not like you don't feel like there's any aversion or attraction on part of the men for the women. You just feel like the men treat the women like sisters. It's a very healthy environment. So I was talking to the temple president, and I could see your temple is different. You don't have very, very strong demarcations between men and women, although you have them. But I could see they're not as tight as they are in other temples. And I can see that the brahmacharis, they're not feeding aversion into their consciousness as a means of detachment. I said, what's going on? What's your philosophy here? And he said, my philosophy is if you try to separate it too much, too far, it actually creates an attraction. It creates aversion. So we are not allowing them to mingle. We never allow men and women to be alone like that. But we are not saying that together, if a man talks to a woman in a group, that you should be whipped 3 times and like that. We're not doing that. So he said, my observation is it creates an atmosphere that's free. There's less attraction and less repulsion. Whereas if you separate it too much, then the men become attracted because they're not getting their pakora at 10 o'clock at night and they're starving. So I told him, I said, I've thought that way also, and I've observed the same thing. And I said, but it's a debatable issue because it's hard to support that with Shastra. And he said, yes, I've discussed that with other devotees, and they haven't agreed. He said, but it's my observation that it's less problematic when we do this. So it means that our renunciation should be healthy and balanced, not too adverse, because too much aversion creates attraction. So we have the compromise, Radhika, we have the sari. But the bikini sari that's also not good. Women should dress respectfully, and the bikini sari, okay, I know it's hot sometimes, so you have to wear the bikini choli, but saris are meant to actually cover your body. So that's an issue that has also been discussed. that I find interesting. That, you know, the main idea is men may be men, but at least don't dress in a way that would provoke them. If they're provoked, even though you're covered, that's their problem for sure. But don't do anything to provoke them. Okay, you know, you want to go to bed and you don't want to eat the pakora, and I come up with a plate of pakoras and they're hot, steaming, and there's chutney on them. I go, Prabhu, pakoras, why don't you have one? No, you don't want to eat a pakora, so my job is, okay, I'll put the pakoras away. Okay, let me put the pakoras away. You don't want to eat them. My job is not, sure you don't want to have a pakora? They're really good. I just had one. So that's the idea. Does that make sense? Yes, Katie says, yes, you're right. In Islam, when something happens, the woman is always wrong and the man is always right. Yeah. So definitely in a court of law, if a man rapes a woman because she was dressed provocatively, he's going to lose the case. That's not an excuse. And don't misunderstand that I'm saying it's an excuse. And yes, in these kind of cultures, patriarchal cultures, where women should be respected and not well respected, then they do get blamed, and it's wrong. And it can happen in our own movement. Respect for women is extremely important, and if in our movement we don't respect women properly, we're going to have problems. I mean, we do have problems in places where women aren't respected. It's very, very important. I'm so happy to see and hear you, Guru Maharaj. This class is wonderful. So many nice realizations. You describe very nicely the nature, mindset of men. Very expertly explained. Well, I'm a man, I know. I can't explain the nature and mindset of women so well. Unless Krishna gives me some female Shakti and I can incarnate as a woman and see what it's like. Although, I did have it, okay everybody, just so all you women know, I do have a little experience of what it's like to be a woman. Many, many years ago, we went to San Francisco, and there's a gay district, and we thought, well, gay people seem to be more open-minded and liberal. Why don't we distribute books to them? And gay people as a class tend to be creative, artistic, and we never really, preached. And they're all in one area, and San Francisco is the biggest gay city, I think, in America. And then there's a gay area in a gay city. And so we thought it would be a good place to preach. We thought they'd be very open. And, whenever you're in a minority and discriminated against, you tend to be very open to, people who are in minorities, like devotees, distributing books, So people are sympathetic. I found that with African American people. It was always easy to distribute books to them. Even in the Devotee, they would tend not to discriminate, because they were discriminated against, and they don't want to discriminate. So we thought we would go into the gay area, and these people would be very open for books. And so being a man, distributing books to men in the gay area was equivalent to being a woman distributing books to a man in the same way. At least I got to experience what it's like to be a woman. And it was a good experience for me to have, because as you all know, I'm so beautiful and attractive. What to speak of 35 years ago, when I had big muscles also and a little more hair, you could imagine how attracted the men were to me. It was like incredible. So I did get to experience what it's like to be looked at as an object of another man's lust. And I can say it was not pleasant. So yes, ladies, I can sympathize with you to some degree, because I did have that experience. And on other occasion, I have been propositioned and grabbed when I was a teenager by a gay man. So I know a little bit what you experience in the presence of lusty men. And so Krishna gave me that experience, and and I'm happy to have had that experience. I'm not faulting these men, although one man did grab me in the wrong place. But, it's normal. We have the sexual tendency in the society. It's not controlled. And I was an object of it. And so I know what the women are going through. And so, yes. But I would still say, ladies, knowing this, don't provoke men. That's the thing. Men they're so ready, and just feel sorry for them, so don't provoke them. Krishna Consciousness, he says, I can say from 25 years marriage experience, stable Krishna conscious marriage, so helpful to make progress. Often I think if I would have a different husband, I would not be a devotee anymore. I agree. It's a really good point. I was thinking the exact same thing. If I had a different husband, I would not be a devotee anymore. Good relationships makes us and me and my husband to be able to focus on Krishna consciousness, not on fighting. So good marriage is essential, especially for women. I 108% agree. The education, how to be good husband and good wives should be there. I had another realization, which is kind of what you're saying. My wife and I were talking about something. And some godbrother of mine did something which was bad. It was not just bad, it was really bad. Not really bad, it was really, really bad. Almost, yeah, it was really, really bad. And my wife was talking about it and how she was asking me to see what I could do to help rectify the situation. And so I was realizing one thing by talking with her. I was realizing she has a very, very moral nature. That she's like, if things are not right, she picks up on it, she feels it, and she wants to make everything right. And she, in her own character, is she never does anything wrong. She's very good at that. That's just her nature. And I realized how much that has affected me, being married to her. That her nature has a tremendous effect on me. You know, houses, everything has to be clean, organized, the food's healthy, this, that, and the next thing. So I was realizing that, you know, when you're deciding who to marry, you should also understand the nature of that person, because their nature is going to affect you. So if that person is very whimsical, not organized, not clean, not controlled, whatever it is, not moral, not honest, that's going to affect, it's going to rub off on you in some way. My sister had a boyfriend once, and I saw her, or I was talking to her on the phone, and she was cursing all the time, and she's never cursed in her whole life, and I'm, what's up with her cursing? And she didn't even realize she was doing it. And she goes, oh my God, my boyfriend, he's always cursing every fifth word. So who you associate with obviously affects you, and this person you're living with, their nature is going to affect you. So when you're thinking about marrying somebody, this is really important to understand what this person is like, because I'm going to become a little bit like them, good or bad, by associating with them. So, you know, are they lazy? Do they have bad sadhana? Are they compromised? Do they have low ethical standards? Are they very loose with the opposite sex? Whatever it is, it's going to have some effect on you. So it's interesting in choosing a partner to consider how this partner will affect me, or consider what I'm weak in and what would help me. So maybe I'm not so regulated. And it would not be good to have another partner who's also not so regulated. It would actually be good to have someone who's regulated, because they'll get up every morning at a certain time, and I'll think, I should get up also. They'll go to bed at a certain time, I'll think, I should go to bed also at that time. So that's an interesting thing that I realized the other day when my wife and I were talking about this something that a godbrother did that was really, really bad. And she was so upset about it. And she was like, you have to do something. You have to deal with this in some way. You can't, you now know what's going on. You can't allow this. So and I was thinking, yeah, that's what she's like. She has high principles and she sticks to them. So Katie is asking, how about we develop some future husband-wife training program as you have the Japa program? Well, I have my Sacred Union. I think there are 20 to 30 lectures. And There is one now online that's been developed by, I think, the Congregational Ministry. Sono will know what the name of it is. There is I think you have to pay for it. But actually, we're working on something. I'll have more information. There's another devotee that's asking me to help her, and she wants to create a course that, in theory, would be mandatory. Like no blessing would be given to a marriage until they take the course. But I think a big part of the training has to be brahmacharis, men being trained, courses for men, courses for women, and courses that are for both men and women. How to be a wife, how to be a husband. There is sacred union. We have yeah, I think if you're going to get married, don't get initiated without the disciple course, don't get married without the marriage course. I think all of you, one day, just go to my SoundCloud and just look through all the lectures are there. There's probably now upwards of 500 or 600 lectures in maybe up to 20 different categories. So I've chosen categories which I think are super important and relevant. So we spent a lot of time on the marriage. I can't say I'm the ultimate expert, but there's a lot there. The problem I noticed is that young, unmarried boys don't want to listen to advices from older, more experienced married devotees, and ending up in dysfunctional relationships, and probably will end up divorced and discouraged. The problem in ISKCON is that we still brainwash brahmacharis. Getting married is a fall down. It's insane for me. Yeah. And that's something you can't control, because there are devotees, renunciates, who really believe strongly in renunciation and the value of it, and they don't have so much faith in Grihastha Ashram. It's, maybe they have changed their opinion, but the lectures that they gave 20 years ago may still be available. The books they wrote 20 years ago may still be available. And I don't think many senior people preach that way as much as we used to. But still, many senior people have deep faith in renunciation and don't have a lot of faith in Grihastha Ashram, and do speak about the negatives of the ashram. And one of the things that I've observed, and I've mentioned before, is that we have to understand it within context. So if I'm speaking to a man, and the man is saying, I'm not sure if I should get married or not, and he's asking me what it's like to be married, then I'll tell him. I say, well, if you get married, it means this, just the realities of it, which is what a lot of renunciates do. They're talking, it's not always that they're putting down marriage, they're talking about the realities, but unfortunately, they'll tend to talk about the negative realities, not the positive realities. So to this brahmachari, I will tell him the negative realities, because he needs to know, he doesn't need to know the positive at this point, because he wants to stay single. So because he wants to stay single, then my job is to help him stay single. So I'll say, this is what Grihastha life is like. If a man is saying to me, I'm thinking about getting married, it looks attractive, brahmachari life is also attractive, I'm not really sure what I should do, then I'll tell him about the glories of marriage, and I'll tell him about the difficulties of marriage, and I'll let him decide. And any training for brahmacharis about marriage would encapsulate both the positive and negative. And those who want to remain brahmacharis, they would pay note to the negative, and they would say, probably it's better I don't marry. And those who want to get married would pay note to the negative and say, okay, I need to be able to deal with these things. So we don't want to be dysfunctional as grihastas, and brahmachari is, the early, whether you're a brahmachari or you join ISKCON married, training is necessary. Because most men, see, the problem is it's very easy to misread things that Prabhupada is saying about marriage and about male and female duties. And that's why we need training, to be able to give it context and experience and explain really what Prabhupada means. I will sound weird, but my husband said lately that because naked women are all around, including advertisements, it's not excited him anymore. But of course, I understand your point. Yeah. I mean, that's true. I've thought about the same thing. Like in our culture, we're so used to seeing women that aren't dressed well that, if a Muslim man comes from Saudi Arabia and goes on a walk on the beach in America, he'll be like, oh my God, he'll have to control himself from attacking all the young girls. Whereas if we do it, we're so used to seeing it, it's like we may not even notice it. So I don't know if that justifies it, but at least it adds to the discussion of the it was the point about attraction and aversion that I was talking about before. You remove it entirely, and then it can create more attraction. So I think, what our idea is, it's not that we try to eliminate women from the world and we don't deal with them, but the women should know they should dress in a way that's not provocative, and beyond that, it's the man's fault. And if you're going to put hot pakoras under his nose, he might eat them. So if you don't want him to eat them, better not do it. Now, your husband is older, and so he's probably seen it all, and it's like, yuck. So, but still, for a younger man, it's not going to be the same. So it's an interesting discussion, for sure. Sari is Indian clothing, but that's different topic. Yeah, sari is nice. Yeah, so the next class we'll have is about bikini saris. If bikini saris are cholis that are the size of bikini tops, and then the sari is wrapped in a way that it's not wrapped over your stomach and back. And your sari is down lower than a bathing suit. So somehow or other, I don't know where that style came from, Bollywood or something, but it seems to be inappropriate in the temple. A woman on the street wants to dress that way, that's her business. But in coming to a temple, we should keep covered as far as possible, I think, I know sometimes men wear shorts to the temple and t-shirts, and I don't think that's appropriate either. It's a sacred place. So, yeah. A different topic. Can you briefly say what the retreat will be about? I'm still working on it, but it's going to be amazing. And like these things we talked about today, these are all very, very real and very important for us to deal with and to know about. And the retreat's going to deal with these things, the very real things. Things that will, I think, deepen and broaden our understanding of Krishna consciousness. I want to, one of the results of the retreat is I think it's important for all of you to deepen your faith in Krishna consciousness. And one of the advantages we had as Prabhupada disciples is that we had Prabhupada, and that in itself, it just increased our faith to such a depth that you couldn't budge us, and we were willing to do anything. And I think if there's anything the best service that I could do for you is to deepen your faith and understanding. And I think a lot of your problems will automatically be resolved if your faith increases and your understanding of Krishna consciousness increases. And the third thing that I want to do is increase your taste for Krishna consciousness. Because if you have taste, faith, and depth of understanding, so many of your problems are actually because of the lack of these three things. So if I can increase those three things, and then that will help you tremendously. And then the fourth thing we want to do is to help you deal with and confront things which maybe you're running away from, or things you're not running away from, but you're not dealing with properly. So I think those are basically 4 areas of the workshop. And I think if I can get those 4 things, if I can help you better realize your problems and face them and know how to deal with them, increase your taste of Krishna consciousness, your faith, and your understanding, that it could permanently affect you in a positive way. So that's my hope, that this won't be something temporary, but it will affect you deeply, like permanently. And a lot of those other problems that you're playing with and challenged with, they won't be there anymore because you're on another depth of Krishna consciousness. So, Caitlin says, thank you, Prabhu. Can you talk about when the woman wants affection and the husband tells her she is bad because it's not increasing Krishna consciousness? That's why the husbands need training, because it's a misunderstanding. It's kind of like, I don't know, I think it's kind of like, okay, I'll eat the bakoras, so I chew them and then I'll spit them out. You know, it's like, well, if you can eat them, just swallow them. You know, it's kind of like if you're going to get married, then there's things, you know, it's like one woman wrote me and said, well, we have 2 kids, but my husband won't help me take care of them. It's like, well, if you're going to get married and have kids and you don't want to take care of them, what are you thinking? You know, so you're married to a woman. A woman is made of the need for affection. That's what she thrives on. And it would be like saying, I'm going to marry you, but I won't cook for you. It's like, what's that mean? You're going to be a wife and not cook? Or I'm going to have kids, but I won't let you talk to them. You know, it doesn't make any sense. So it doesn't mean he's a bad man. It just means that he's looking at the philosophy in a particular way, kind of more like a renunciate, and not applying it within the context of what's realistic for marriage. And it's natural for many men to see that way. Well, if I show affection to you, it's like a waste of time. We could be talking about Krishna, and now I have to like hug you and tell you you're great. You know, I don't want to do that. And, you know, go out on a walk. No, you know, I don't want to go on a walk. I want to like do some seva. This is a waste of time. So he doesn't understand that those are necessary parts of a relationship. And he needs to be educated. So if you can put him in touch with an experienced Grihastha who can explain these things, that would help him a lot. So a lot of times it's just innocence. It's his way he's understanding the philosophy, and maybe the way it's been given to him by men who aren't married, or men, or my wife says, yeah, and that might be given to him by men who are married, but look at their relationship. It's probably horrible. My wife always makes that observation. When I say, but some married men, senior, say this. And she says, yeah. And I can guarantee you, if they say that, they don't have a good marriage. And I think she's right about 101% of the time. Because some things just work in marriage. So if a man's telling you to do something that doesn't work in marriage, probably his wife is not happy. That's what I've seen. And I would bet on that. So that's another observation. Katie says, Krishna Consciousness mentioned about the lack of good devotee men in Poland. Here in the UK, I noticed a whole different problem. We have some decent male devotees in Grihastha Asrama, but they are so detached. Yeah, that is a problem. So detached, they can't be bothered with getting married. Well, that's another issue. This is such a complicated issue. And the other issue is, should a spiritual master ask a male devotee to marry because he has good, serious female devotees who would make good wives, who need good husbands, and there are no good husbands? Should he ask this man to marry them? And the answer is definitely maybe. And that's going to be up to the guru. And sometimes the gurus will do that. Now, Prabhupada said, you must obey every instruction of your spiritual master, but there's one instruction you don't have to obey, and that's the instruction to get married. If your spiritual master says, I want you to get married, that instruction you can say, Guru Maharaj, I will do whatever you say except this. Of course, I don't know If you have a right to say that, I don't know if any devotee has used that right, but Prabhupada says you have that right. And sometimes you find that, like the four Kumaras, they were sons of Brahma. Brahma wanted them to be progenitors, to populate the universe. They said no. He wanted Narada to be a progenitor. Narada said no. So that does happen. But there may be cases when you talk to a male disciple and say, look, this woman is a very valuable devotee. She's a very good devotee. She'll make a very good husband and a very good wife. And you are the perfect man to do that. And I don't know what's going to happen to her. And I think as a team, you'll be very powerful. And so the disciple may say yes. There's another scenario that happened. There was a brahmachari, and he had a background in the corporate world. So now he was preaching in the corporate world. And then he ended up counseling. And as a counselor, he was counseling women. And when you counsel women, I imagine, it was just him alone with a woman in his office counseling them, because generally a counselor will be alone with a woman. So for a brahmachari to be alone with a woman, at least you should be a grihastha. But brahmachari, no, it's not proper. So his Guru Maharaj saw the trajectory of his career, that he's going to be involved in preaching to men and women. He's going to be involved in counseling men and women. Even if it's just email, even if I'm just having an email discussion with a woman, it's still quite private and she's opening her mind to me. And as a brahmachari, that's not what I should do. Okay, as a grihastha counselor, that's different. So his Guru Maharaj said, if you're going to do this service, then I won't let you do it as a brahmachari. You need to get married. And I don't know the details, but he decided that this was an important service to do for preaching, and so he got married. But he had no intention of getting married. His intention was to remain brahmachari. So there are those situations. Another scenario would be, you have the good detached brahmachari, but the guru can see, okay, he's 28, but I don't think by the age of 35 he's just by his nature I can see he's not really going to remain a brahmachari. It's not. I don't see the symptoms in him. I see the symptoms of a grihastha. So then at that point he might say, I want you to get married, even though he doesn't want to. Or he might say, when you're 30, I want you to get married, and this is the girl. And I'm just going to tell the girl, I have a husband for you at 30, you're going to do it. And he'll say, why? And he said, because you'll need to get married, and you should do it now, and she needs to get married. And I can guarantee you will get married. And so why artificially push on? Or he might say, okay, I'll allow you to go to your 35. This brahmachari training will be very good. But I can see after 35 for you, it'll be dangerous. And you're going to need to get married. So let's arrange it now. So those are different scenarios. And so it's up to the guru, or it could be temple authorities that do that. So I think that's in a sense, the duty or the job of temple authority. So if I have a disciple who wants to be a brahmachari, and I feel that that's not right or artificial for him, then I would tell him. And I had one like that who kept telling me I'm going to be a brahmachari, and I said, I don't think so. And he would say, well, maybe I should get married next week. No, I'm deciding to be a brahmachari. And then he gave me I actually told him he should be married, and he gave me his final conclusion. He said, there's no way I'm going to get married. And the next week, he introduced me to his fiancée. True story. I won't mention any names. Some of you may know who I'm talking about. So, Katie says, and yet there are many devotees who look down on Grihastha gurus. Well, that's, there's more education that's needed in ISKCON. I have a guy brother who's a sannyasi, and you know what he told me? He said, I don't think any sannyasis should be gurus. I think they should all be grihasthas. I think they should be grihasthas. They should stay in one place with their wives and have ashrams and be gurus. So I can just tell you my experience. I have a lot of people who are not my disciples writing me letters telling me that my guru doesn't deal with these issues or doesn't understand how to deal with these issues, or even telling me sometimes my guru told me to go to you for these issues. So there are things that grihastas know or can deal with that sannyasis wouldn't have experience of. And a lot of grihasta gurus have, sannyasi gurus have grihastas counseling their grihastas. So I would say that's just some ignorance. Traditionally, sannyasis were not gurus in ancient society. They were grihastas, and people would live in their ashrams. So this was a seminar indeed. Went 2 hours and 20 minutes, and it was indeed interesting. And it is being recorded. Audio was recorded right here. I have a recorder. You can't see it, and of course on Facebook, and it will go up on SoundCloud eventually, and it will go up on YouTube. And if you like this, share it. You'll see it when it comes on Facebook, on my Facebook. Just share it with others. I think it's valuable. I think it's interesting. And thank you for watching. And Hare Krishna to all of you. And Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. What name? What name of what? The name of the devotee that got married? Not sure what you're asking, Nirmal. Krishna Karshani likes Grihastha gurus. Yeah. I'm waiting for Nick to tell me. Class. The name of this class? What are we going to name it? Okay, before we leave, we have to decide what we're going to name this class. What are we going to name it? It's something about, we started about something about the realities of Vedic culture. Something about being real. I'll have to think of a name. Can someone think of a name? Being real about being real? Yeah. How about being real about being real? Is that what we talked about? Does that describe this class? Being real about being real? What do you think? Does that make sense? Can I comment? Can I write something? I can write. No, I can't. Oh, I can add a description. So I can write that right now, if you agree. I'm writing the description. Being real about being real. Yeah. Is that okay with your approval? Being real versus expectations. Problems unmarried people face. Okay. I'm going to make a long title for this. Okay? And there'll be a description. How about that? I think, and Guru Nisha's not here. I'll send her an email. See, what Sonal used to do is write descriptions of these classes. Okay, so we'll write a description with all of these ideas. Problems the unmarried face, reality versus expectations, and being real about being real. And those other things can be subtitles. Okay, let's do it. I will make a note on my to-do list to write a title for this. If I go again, I'm going to see being real about being real. I have that as a title. And then reality versus expectations. That's one. Subtitle. And reality versus expectations, and what was yours? And I'll just say being real in marriage. It's more mystical. You know, you want to have a title that doesn't say everything. Okay, so there's a title. Done. Save. Okay. So it's done. The title is there. Hare Krishna. So it'll go up on my Facebook page, and then you can like it, share it. I think it's an important class. And Hare Krishna.